Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Daniel, and today in this video we'll be covering my round 5 game from the Quebec Open Championships. This I played at the beginning of the month, and in round 5 my score at the moment is 2 out of 4, so 50%. And in round 5 I'm paired against the 1700, and let's take a look at what happened in the game. So here my opponent had played the move bishop to f3. So my opponent is 1700, but at the time I was really nervous for some reason for this tournament because my mindset still hadn't been fully adjusted yet. However, now, as you'll see in my later videos where I publish about tournaments that I played more recently, I am performing better. So at this point, my mindset was still very calculation based and I was still really nervous. So anyways, my opponent here plays bishop f3. I'm also playing black. And here I did a little bit of preparation and I found that we would go into this variation here, and after bishop f3 I prefer the move queen to a5, which I played in the game. The idea here is that if you play knight takes c6, b takes c6, which happened in the game, and here if you play bishop takes on c6, I have the move rook to b8, double attacking this pawn on b8, which cannot actually be defended. This bishop here and this rook here, and this cannot actually be defended. You can't move the b pawn forwards because then you would lose the rook in the corner. So let's say b3, then I can simply play bishop captures on a1, queen captures on a1, and here I'm up in exchange. I do have to be careful of some long diagonal weaknesses, but I do have the move e5 to block up this diagonal. White does get some counterplay with rook d1, but then after something like queen c7, bishop f5, bishop e6, I should be okay. So going back, and there are also many other different variations here. There is no bishop captures a7, by the way, to attack the rook, because there is simply queen captures on a7. So going back, that my opponent saw this as well. So here they actually played the move b4. B4 is quite the tricky move. The idea here is even though I'm attacking the rook in the corner, this pawn is attacking my queen. And if I take this pawn, which I actually did in the game, then after bishop takes on c6, and something like rook to b8, it looks like that after bishop captures on a7, my rook is actually trapped. There are no legal squares, well, there are legal squares for it, but all these squares are covered by my two bishops. I do have bishop takes a1 here, but that's sort of the idea with this plan. And here if I play something like queen a4 to defend this pawn, then there is something like the move c3 to block this diagonal, and here technically my queen is attacked by my opponent's queen. If you play queen takes, then after rook f takes on d1, then here I still have threats here on this c3 pawn. I have to play, let's say I play something like bishop e7 to defend, then after something like rook to d7 even, attacking my bishop, this is going to be really tough for me to play. So going back here, after b4, I spent a really long time here. I calculated a couple of variations. So queen takes b4 was the move I initially played, and this is the correct move. This is the best move in the position. Here my opponent followed up with bishop captures on c6. At this point, I saw a couple of different variations I can go for. Here I did see the move bishop captures on a1, which is the best move. I didn't play that though. In the game, I played bishop to a6. My idea here is you play bishop captures on a8, after bishop captures on f1, and something like you have to move this rook because it's under fire. If you play queen takes on f1, then I simply have bishop captures on a1, and here I'm up in exchange. So here after something like rook to b1, then here I can simply play a move like queen to a4, attacking this pawn. There is no point in trying to defend this bishop here, because after something like queen takes on f1, then basically I'm going to lose the piece. And then I allow my opponent's rook to get into b7, and at this point my position is just really passive. So here after queen a4, queen takes on f1, rook takes on a8, and here I have some threats on these pawns. Actually in the game I think I saw queen a4 attacking both of these pawns, because I didn't actually evaluate king takes on f1 because I assumed this is just bad. I evaluated queen takes on f1, rook takes on a8, and here I'm double attacking these two pawns. There is no rook to b2 because of my bishop here on b7, and I thought this was better for me, and the computer agrees. So this is the variation I had seen. However, in the game, I should have played the move bishop captures on a1. The reason why I rejected this was because after queen captures on a1, bishop to a6, and after bishop captures on a8, bishop captures on f1, then there is the move bishop to h6 here. And after f6, bishop takes, king takes, and queen captures on f1, then I'm down a bishop. And alternatively, going back, here after bishop to a6, let's say you play rook to b8, attacking my queen. Then after, let's say, queen to c4, then bishop captures on a8, rook captures on a8, and bishop to h6 after something like f6. I thought that this pawn structure here was a little bit weak. My pieces are a little bit more passive after something like bishop to e3. Here I do have queen takes on c2. However, I thought after something like rook to c1, this looked a bit more favorable for white rather than black, because there is rook c7 to pick back up this pawn. This queen is really active, and this bishop is kind of random here. It could get attacked in the future, so I didn't really like this for black. So instead, in the game, after bishop captures on c6, I went for bishop to a6. Rook to b8 was played. This move I had also seen. Here I prepared the move queen to a5. Idea is attacking this pawn. This pawn is no longer defended. If we trade here, queen takes and rook takes, then here I'm still attacking this pawn. You can't play rook b2 to defend. In the game, here my opponent took, I took, and this is the move I had missed. I had only calculated queen takes or king takes, but I missed the move queen to d5. Queen to d5 is a very nice move. Idea is you are protecting this bishop here on a8 while simultaneously protecting this pawn, and also technically my bishop is under attack and also is my queen. Pretty much, let's say I play queen takes and bishop captures on d5, I have to save my bishop. Say after something like bishop to a6, then after bishop takes on a7, now I am losing. There are these two passed pawns here on the queen side, which will simply march up the board, and this 4-on-3 on the king side won't get going because my opponent has 3 pawns there, so it's really difficult to break through. So after queen to d5, also I can't really move my queen anywhere because then there'd simply be king takes or rook takes. I can't take this bishop because it's defended by the queen, so this is a really tough spot for me. Here I considered 2 different moves, well 3 moves, which are the top 3 moves. One is queen to d8, attacking the queen, and if you trade, then I'm still attacking this bishop. However, I rejected this because after something like bishop back to f3, and after something like, let's say, okay, I guess king captures on f1, rook captures on f1 is better, and rook to b7, this looks really passive. I'm going to lose a pawn as well. Going back, here I also considered the move queen takes on d5, bishop captures on d5. However, here I'm going to lose this pawn. If I play a5, then I simply lose this bishop. So I have to move this bishop to safety, which is a3, and then after, not there, bishop captures on a7, this looks just lost for me. So here I settled on a very tricky move, bishop to b5. The idea with bishop to b5 is to take advantage of some back rank weaknesses here. If you play rook takes on b5, then simply queen to e1 is checkmate. All these squares are blocked by the pawns. Alternatively, if you play queen takes on b5, then after queen takes, rook takes, and rook takes on a8, rook to b7, this is actually what happened in the game. This still looks quite difficult to defend, but I thought there are still chances here. After a5, rook captures on e7, I thought there was ideas of rook c8 and then rook d8 to take advantage of some back rank weaknesses here. So let's say rook a7, which is a move that can be played. After bishop to c3, I can play rook d8 and try to sneak behind and get to these 2 pawns. And also going back, here I had also calculated if something like c4 were to be played. If c4 was played, then I would have the move queen captures on a2 here, attacking this rook firstly, and there is no way for you to actually take this bishop. If you take with the rook, then simply queen to a1 will lead to checkmate after you block with all your pieces. If you play c captures on b4, then after, oh, not that move, queen captures on b8, this is simply going to be a checkmate in 2 moves. And if you play queen captures on b5, then here after rook captures on a8, my position is still a little bit worse because of this doubled queen and rook on the b file, but this still should be survivable. So, and I also evaluated, let's say after let's say a4, which is the other move, because now I don't have queen takes on a7. Then here I simply have queen takes on a4. If you play queen takes on b5, queen captures on b5, rook captures on b5, and rook captures on a8. I am now up a pawn, and this should be better for black, if not winning soon in the future. And also furthermore, the other variation I calculated for a4 is if I play a3, there is a takes on b5, but I calculated, and also bishop to c6 here, then after a6 and something like c4 obviously doesn't work here because of queen takes on a2. And if my opponent plays a4, then I simply have queen takes on a4. And if we trade everything down here, queen takes, then I simply take this pawn on c2. And now I'm up a pawn and I have winning chances. So in the game, however, my opponent saw these ideas, I hope, and played the move queen takes on b5. Queen takes, and rook takes pawn, rook b7, and here I play a5. I'm okay with leaving off this pawn because of the variations I mentioned earlier. Here my opponent plays c4, and here I just simply try to consolidate. Bishop to e5 was a little bit of a mistake. It was a bit premature because it allowed f4. Here I should have just stayed cool, calm, and collected here, and just played the move something like rook to c8 even, for example, to put my rook behind this pawn, or even rook to d8 to try to sneak around. That is also another idea. So here c5, bishop there, that forces my bishop back. a4 to keep my pawn on a dark square. King e1, and here I try to slowly bring my pieces in. My opponent does bring the king in. And at this point I am losing, unfortunately. Here was my last chance to try to hold something. After king to d4, the correct move here is to play rook to d8 to cut off the king on the d file, so the king cannot go there. And I'm threatening f5 to force the king back. As you can see. In the game, however, I play e6 to prevent my opponent's king from coming in. My opponent's king sneaks around. And here, at this point, I had one last chance to save a draw. After king takes on a5, I have to find the move bishop takes on f4. The idea here is that I need to eliminate as many pawns as I can on the king side so that I can maybe push these pawns in the future. King a6, for example, bishop takes on a2, a5. Here, rook to c3 is actually a losing move. Correct move here, or actually this is already a bit losing because I believe I shouldn't take this pawn on h2 because that's a bit too much. Here, this is actually quite a difficult endgame. Computer here suggests the move h4, I assume with ideas to just march forwards. So going back, and here, due to low time, I make quite the fatal error. I misevaluated something and I took this pawn for some reason, which is completely losing because this simplifies down to a losing king and pawn endgame. Simply, my opponent uses this a pawn to lure my king away, and then slowly comes over and mops up these two pawns. Here I played on a little bit just to make sure that my opponent could win this position. And here, after king to h7, I resigned the game because g8 equals queen is inevitable. My opponent will find it. There is no way for me to stop it. So at this point, I just resigned the game. So in general, I think in this game, my preparation in the opening kind of worked against me. As you can see, after a variation like this, after this position with b takes on c6, you'll see that I actually ended up giving my opponent a passed c pawn already early on in the opening. Although this position is like better for black, I didn't see the correct move with bishop captures on a1. So in general, not the best preparation, also not the best middle game technique on my part. Should have used, well, not necessarily more time, but should have calculated a bit more precisely here. But in general, it was an alright game. Preparation wasn't the best. Could have used my calculation skills a bit better. And yeah, in general, hope you all enjoyed this game, and thanks for watching.